Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I'm so very thrilled to welcome AnnElise Hatjakes to the podcast today to talk about a very controversial film in the history of cinema, The Devils, starring Oliver Reed and Vanessa Redgrave, released 50 years ago in July of 1971. How are we doing, AnnElise?
Doing well. Yeah, still recovering from that viewing, but doing well.
Yeah, so going into this, I think I even put this in the email to you. I said, so I've heard this is a very controversial film. I have not seen it yet, so just prepare yourself. I don't know what I'm in for either. And watching this film over the weekend, I was like, how were they even able to make this in 1971? I don't know about you, but boy, 3 years before there's the MPA ratings board system comes out with, GPGRX. Before 68, you couldn't really get away with a whole lot in movies just in general. And I'm like, so in 1970, they're filming this crazy movie. How did they get away with this? It's amazing to me.
Yeah. I was curious about that too, because especially the depictions of nudity
Yeah.
and some pretty erotic content, I was surprised to see that it still holds an R rating, I think. Yeah, I was surprised to see that.
Yeah, released with an X. And we're going to talk about it. I did a deep dive over the weekend. I think you did too, about some of the research for this movie. Really interesting kind of what happened with it once it actually came out. And around the world it was getting banned, and a lot of places for years you couldn't even see this film. And yeah, this is considered one of the most controversial films of all time. So we're going to talk about that. Before we get to more on The Devils, I just want to ask you about what role has film played in your life in general, AnnElise, and what are a few favorite films you have?
Yeah, so I grew up with movies. I mean, that was kind of our family pastime. I have 7 siblings, so I think that my parents liked taking us to movies because it was a time for all of us to be quiet for a couple of hours.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as a writer, I'm really drawn to story and the role of stories in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So a few of my favorite movies, I'm a sucker for romantic comedies, and I will defend them till the end.
Yeah.
So I mean, when it came out, I mean, since then, I don't. It doesn't have as tender of a spot in my heart, but I remember when Bridget Jones's Diary came out, I was like, oh, this is speaking to me. Um, but I love the Coen brothers. I also love kind of goofball comedies, like Tommy Boy. That was one that all of my
I
siblings and
love
I
Tommy Boy.
watched. Yeah, so definitely very eclectic taste. I've been getting into more avant-garde movies just since I've returned to graduate school, but
Mm-hmm.
I'll pretty much watch anything. Yeah, it's
Including
really
this.
hard. Yes, including this, like 99%, only sometimes looking away.
Have you seen a lot of films of like the 1970s? Is that a decade of film that you've seen a lot of titles? Like before we started recording, you mentioned The Exorcist. That's a very famous film from the 70s.
Hmm. Yeah, not really.
Mm-hmm.
I recently took a film theory class
Oh, cool.
in the fall semester of last year,
Mm-hmm.
and I was exposed to a lot more movies from different decades, but I haven't done any real deep dives except
Mm-hmm.
for what's kind of in, I don't know, the filmic canon, I
Oh,
think.
cool. Okay. Yeah, this is an interesting era of film. This is like in between like the introduction of the MPA ratings board system where you're able to have nudity, have language, adult themes, some things you couldn't get away with even just a few years before, but we're not quite to Jaws, we're not quite to Star Wars yet. So really the studios in like the early 70s are kind of hands off and giving filmmakers the ability to make the movies that they want. And as we'll talk about, Ken Russell definitely got the chance to make the make the movie he wanted to do with
Yeah,
this.
it seems
Uh,
like
yeah, he had just made a pretty popular film just like the year before, year and a half before, called Women in Love. That was an Academy Award-winning film. So he was riding high, and they probably said, "Yeah, go make another film. We'd love you." And then they saw this. They wait a second. Stop. Let's stop. Let's talk about this movie and see where we can make cuts first, right? And I should tell our listeners, AnnElise, that we know each other from the MFA in Creative Writing program at University of Nevada, Reno. We were in that program from 2015 to 2018. What do you remember from that time working
Well,
at UNR?
yeah, during that time, I mean, at least in terms of us working together as writers, I do remember having to read some of your pieces with the lights on because I'm so easily spooked.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a great experience. We were part of the
Yeah,
inaugural
the first
class.
group.
Yeah, so I think we were pretty well performing guinea pigs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a great time. I loved your work so much, and it's just an honor to have you on today to talk about this crazy movie. So before we get into the research, I wanted to give our listeners just a very brief summary, kind of what this movie is about for those who might not be aware of this one. So let's see. So the film takes place in 17th century France, where Father Urbain Grandier, played by Oliver Reed, has control over the city Loudun, where Cardinal Richelieu and many others would like to exert their own power. They want to destroy him, and what better way to do it than to set him up as a warlock who has possessed a local nunnery, where Mother Superior Jean, played by Vanessa Redgrave, is sexually obsessed with him and accuses him at one point of witchcraft. Thus, a mad witch hunter is summoned to gather evidence, and a trial commences. It's kind of like the basic. I mean, it's hard to summarize this one.
Yeah, I know. Every sentence that you introduce really takes a turn.
Yeah, I mean, there have been 3 or 4 episodes I've done for the podcast so far where I'm just like, how do I summarize this movie? And this was, I was like, that took me like 20 minutes to like just kind of get that down. Like, okay, what is going on in this? I mean, because if you were to really break it down kind of by every 10, 15 minutes, it would just read as like the most ridiculous, crazy movie you've ever heard of. Like, I didn't mention about Jean that she has scoliosis. And so when every shot of the movie, her head is tilted like this. And I don't know about you, AnnElise, but for the first 20 minutes, I'm like, what's going on with her head?
I was taking liberties with the character, and then I saw the backstory, and it made more sense.
So let's get into some research about this movie. So this was partly adapted from a 1952 nonfiction book called The Devils of Loudun, and partly from the 1960 play The Devils. United Artists originally pitched the idea to Ken Russell, but abandoned the project after reading his finished screenplay, as they felt it was too controversial. Warner Brothers subsequently agreed to produce and distribute the film. So Warner Brothers came in and said, we want to make this. Was that a good decision on their part? Probably not, and maybe not. I mean, yeah, I mean, not to say that it was a flop, because as we find out here, this was actually a very popular film in Europe. You know, I don't think it did very well in the United States, which I don't know how it could have. Yeah, I don't think this movie lost money. I couldn't find the exact number of how much money it made, but it was not an unsuccessful film by any means.
Yeah, I saw 10 million in the box office. I'm not sure if that's correct.
Okay. That's pretty good for 1971. You look up some of these figures for 1971 films and you're like, oh, that's kind of a flop, because we think about movies now. But in 71, like 10, 12 million was a lot. You know, you have to put it in context. And I can't imagine this movie costs, like, I mean, not to say it looks expensive in some parts, like the amount of people in this movie, and all of the sets that were designed and all the costumes, but it's not like it just had a bunch of big movie stars or anything like that. Yeah. So I can't imagine it costs too much. So the majority of principal photography took place at Pinewood Studios in late 1970. Director Ken Russell hired a large cast of extras, whom he later referred to as a bad bunch, who were demanding, and alleged that one of the female extras appearing as a civilian was sexually assaulted by another male extra. Throughout the shoot, Russell and Reed, the star Oliver Reed, clashed frequently, and by the time principal photography had finished, the two were hardly on speaking terms. So it doesn't sound like an easy shoot.
Wow, yeah. That seems pretty contentious, but that maybe parallels some of the, I don't know, action in the film itself too.
Yeah. I mean, I've read stories about that, like where the director and the star do not get along for whatever reason, but they're too far in to recast, right? So they have to finish the production. And I've like Alfred Hitchcock and Tippi Hedren on Marnie. And then I just recently read about James Cameron and Ed Harris on the film The Abyss. I guess really did not get along. And you hear about this stuff, and like, and I've made films. Like, making a movie is so hard. Like, I mean, I was making little 10-minute short films, and it was tough. And I'm like, man, to do like a, $100 million movie or something where you have, the studio always at your back, and you're trying to deliver a good movie. And if you're not having a good working relationship with the lead actor in the movie, that's really, I can't even imagine that.
Yeah, that seems like it's just coming at all angles.
Yeah. And for a movie like this, where I think it's important on a controversial story like this, that everybody involved in the production is on the same page. Right? Yeah. And if you're not seeing eye to eye with the star, I can't even imagine it. It's crazy. All right, so let's get into what happened when this movie came out. So the film faced harsh reaction from film rating systems due to its violent, sexual, and religious content. It originally received an X rating in both the United Kingdom and the United States. So now we have the NC-17, which is almost never used. Like, they tried it one time in 1995 with Showgirls. like the only time they brought a movie like nationwide with that rating. And the problem is most theaters will not play movies with that rating.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you make your movie NC-17, now it's really just like small art house films is the only ones you ever see that anymore. And when it comes to like a nationwide, it's like, it has to be R, or theaters will not book it. But from like 68, I don't know when I think it was 1990 actually when the NC-17 came about. But before that, it was called X. And probably the most famous X-rated film is Midnight Cowboy. That came out in 1969 with Jon Voight and Dustin Hoffman. That won Best Picture at the Academy Awards, and it was rated X. It was very unusual at the time. So one of the only X-rated films around 71 era is The Devils. And I guess it was rated that in both the UK and the United States. The movie was banned in several countries, including Italy. In Finland, it was banned for 30 years. Wow. Like, nobody in Finland could see it till 2001. Now, in Italy, the government threatened the two actors, Redgrave and Reed, to condemn them to 3 years in prison if they stepped foot in Italy.
Wow.
Can you imagine? You're an actor, you take a job, you do it how the screenplay, how the director wants you to do it. And then a country says, if you step foot here, we're going to put you in jail.
Wow, that's, serious risks. And
so I don't know how long that lasted. I mean, I hope that Vanessa Redgrave can visit Italy now. 50 years later. Oliver Reed died, I want to say, in 1999. He was halfway through shooting the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe, and he died, and they had to finish the movie with like, I think other actors would they'd film him from behind, and they had to finish it without Oliver Reed. That's kind of his famous final film is Gladiator from 2000. But yeah, Vanessa Redgrave is still with us, and she's still acting. I just saw her in something a couple years ago. So she's still performing. And so that must have been hard for someone like her. It's like, what?
Yeah.
She wants to take her family for an Italy vacation. Oh, wait, I might go to jail.
Yeah, mommy was in a controversial movie.
Yeah, I think it's it's the mix of the sexuality, the violence, and the religious, right? That's where it gets that's where it gets really dicey. I think if Oliver Reed and Vanessa Redgrave had appeared in a very sexual, kind of violent, modern story, I think probably would have been okay. But when you have 17th century religious themes, that's where, as we'll talk about, kind of gets into crazy territory here. Mm-hmm. So let's see. In various countries, the film has never received a release in its original uncut form. Critics dismissed the film for its explicit content, though it did win awards for Best Director at the Venice Film Festival, as well as from the U.S. National Board of Review. So it did get a couple awards, did not get any Oscar nominations. I did look that up. It didn't get Golden Globe, Oscar, or BAFTA, or any of that stuff. Won a couple smaller awards. Now, the version that we watched of this movie, AnnElise, had a very controversial scene that was cut from the movie before it came out, even with its X rating, I believe. Like before that version came out in 71, a major sequence was cut in which the nuns tear down and ravish a life-size icon of Christ in an orgy, basically what it is. So it was cut from the film. It vanished for many decades. Film critic Mark Kermode discovered the footage many years later. Ken Russell wanted to reinstate the scene, but found that Warner Brothers had no interest in doing a director's cut. So apparently sometime after that, and I think the version we saw, the deleted scene was very rough. It didn't have the same polish as the rest. So I think maybe Mark Kermode did, or someone else like just inserted the scene like just in its kind of deleted form. And that's the version that we watched. So at least we got to see that scene, which I would have been kind of like intrigued, at least, you know, in terms of the history of this movie, to kind of see what that scene was all about, which we'll talk about. The film was one of the most popular movies at the British box office the year it came out. So as we said, it wasn't a flop. It wasn't just like a come and go kind of movie. The film grossed about 9 million in Europe and an additional 2 million in the United States. So yeah, so you're right, about 10, 11 million. It received negative critical reaction upon its release due to its outrageous, overheated, pornographic nature. It was publicly condemned by the Vatican. And let's see, some of the screenings at the Venice Film Festival were canceled because of the controversial nature. Roger Ebert, my favorite film critic, gave this movie a rare 0-star rating. So I mean, I want to say Roger Ebert gave maybe 20 to 30 films no stars in his 35, 40-year career. I mean, he was at it for a long time. And his review, strangely enough, I did read it on Saturday. His review is not overly negative. It kind of just talks about what the movie's about, and he kind of pokes fun at it a little bit. It's not like I've read some no-star reviews by Ebert where he really just takes it down and says, this is why this movie is terrible, don't see it. The review, it's not super clear that he hates it. So it's kind of a weird, it kind of feels like a 2-star review, but it's 0. So I don't know what happened there. Currently, the film holds a 67% rating on Rotten Tomatoes based on 30 reviews. So it's fresh. 60 and over, it's fresh, right? And then the last thing I wanted to share about this movie was Vanessa Redgrave had an extremely prolific 1971 on film. She appeared in 4 movies in 71. Besides The Devil, she's also in The Trojan Women, La Vacanza, and Mary, Queen of Scots, the latter of which earned her an Oscar nomination for Best Actress in a leading role. So Devils comes out in the summer, at least in the United States. And then she has another historical drama come out in December of 71, Mary, Queen of Scots. That got her an Oscar nomination. That film is set in the 16th century. So she just had to go back one more century to get the Oscar nomination. So December, there's like 15 films that came out in December of 1971 that I want to do an episode about for the podcast, but it's only once a week, so I'm not going to get to all of them. One of the movies that is not going to be talked about in December is Mary, Queen of Scots, but I did watch some of it on Saturday, and it's a really strong film with her and Glenda Jackson, another great actress of the era. I mean, did you see the new one with Margot Robbie? There was a new one that came out in 2018.
Yeah.
Did you like that movie? The newer one?
Yeah, I liked it. I used to teach British literature.
Oh, cool.
So I felt like, it was cool seeing some of that history come to life.
Yeah, it felt very similar to the 2018 version. So like if you've seen that, you kind of have already seen the story that's depicted in the 1971 movie. But instead of Saoirse Ronan and Margot Robbie in the new one, you get kind of 2 of the best female actors of the time, Vanessa Redgrave and Glenda Jackson. So if you're interested in those 2 actresses, you like historical dramas, that's another one to check out from 1971, Mary, Queen of Scots. So that is all my research for the movie. Do you have anything else to share, AnnElise, that I did not touch on?
well, I remember seeing that director also that directed The Devils. He also directed, or at least released, two other films in '71 as well, right?
Yeah, he had at least one. So Women in Love is before this. That it like came out in some places in '69 and then in '70. And then I didn't look up. I can't remember the title. I know there was at least one other film that he released in '71. And I think one of the two awards he got for The Devils, like he got it for The Devils and for the other movie. So
Okay.
sometimes when you have like especially actors, sometimes they'll be in two or three projects in a year, and some of the critics awards, they'll give them like best actor of the year for all three movies. Like it won't be
Oh,
just for one of
interesting.
them.
Okay.
At the Oscars, it has to be just one. In like actor in a leading role, you can't as an actor be nominated for two of those. Like you can only be in one, but you can be nominated for both leading actor and supporting actor.
Oh, interesting.
So that's how Jamie Foxx got a Best Supporting Actor nomination for Collateral with Tom Cruise the year he won for Ray, where he played Ray Charles. He won Best Lead Actor. That confused me at the time because I said, how is Jamie Foxx a supporting actor in Collateral? He's in every scene. Like, how can you be in every scene of a movie and be the supporting actor? I guess if you're acting with Tom Cruise, you're just automatically the supporting actor. Yeah. Like, I'm like, okay. Tatum O'Neal's another one from Paper Moon, which we'll talk about in a couple years, from 1973. She was like 9 or 10 years old when she acted in that movie, and she won Best Supporting Actress, and she's the star of the movie. She's in every scene. Oh, wow. So it's like, okay, she's the lead of the movie. Why? But then sometimes it's kind of like political. It's like, well, if they put them in lead, they might not even be nominated because it's so competitive. But if you put them in supporting, they can win. So like, that's why Viola Davis went supporting actress for Fences a few years ago, where she was the lead female actor of that movie. But I think their thinking was, well, if we go supporting, she might win. And I agree. I think if she had been in the lead category, there was more competition, she might not have won. So that's a whole other conversation. I'm really interested in where people are put in the Oscar pool. I mean, if there was something that should have been nominated for the Oscars for The Devils, AnnElise, what do you think it would be? Costume design? I wrote that down. I thought the costumes were really outstanding in this.
Yeah, the costume and set design was really incredible. And I mean, the acting is also very compelling.
The last 20-30 minutes of this movie with Oliver Reed is, I mean, that's pretty astonishing performance, unlike most anything I've seen in the movies. I mean, so yeah, he would definitely be up there too. So what did we think just overall of The Devils? How would you say, like, what did you say about this one?
Yeah, this one, it's hard to describe. I'll start there to just give myself some freedom. But because we open up, we have this like beautiful kind of performance of the birth of Venus. There are people doing these kind of different like gender performances where men are, wearing bikinis and things like that. And that was really fascinating. So initially it almost seemed, it had kind of a Rocky Horror vibe to it, where it was like lots of very glamorous, very kind of campy, and then things take a very different course very quickly to this kind of historical drama. And so one of the things that I admired about the movie is that it is hard to pin down. I saw that it was classified by some as like a historical melodrama. One said, a lot of them used the descriptor of historical, but in terms of the actual, the other parts of the genre, it seemed like it was hard to pin down. So I thought that made it really compelling to watch, because you truly never know what's going to happen on the level of plot and in terms of character development, because there are so many interesting like layers to it.
Oh yeah, any movie that I don't know where it's going. At this point, I've seen so many films, like when I'm watching something and I'm like, this could go in 10 different directions. That's always really fun for me as like a movie goer, it's like when you know exactly what the last hour is going to be, you're like, it's even if the acting's great, and sometimes I check out a little bit if I just know where it's going. This one, I was like, I have no idea what's going to happen. So that was
Yeah.
kind of exciting. And I think that the look of it is just extraordinary. I just think like the set design, as you say, and the costume design and the cinematography is beautiful. Like the way the film is shot. I mean, some of the scenes of the nunnery of just like Vanessa Redgrave just walking down a hallway, I was like, wow, like some of the shots are really fantastic. I mean, I would say this was not one of the more pleasant experiences of watching a movie I've had for the podcast so far. This is not a movie that you're like snapping your fingers like, wow, this is great.
Yeah.
Like, it's not entertaining. It's not a movie I could say I loved. It's a movie that I think you admire and you kind of can get really invested in based on kind of the, you know, what happened to it historically and all of the controversy surrounding it. But boy, when we get to toward the last 10 minutes, it gets so intense. And the last shot is such a downer. I'm like, this is not a movie to really like be excited about and tell all your friends to go watch, right?
Yeah, it's a tough one to recommend.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's so much to be admired in
Yeah.
it, just on the level of composition. And I was
Mm-hmm.
thinking especially about the film score.
Oh, the score's
There's
great.
a lot of
Mm-hmm.
these really, there's a lot of discordant music, and I think that's what kind of gave me that skin crawly feeling watching it during some of the more controversial scenes. And there was some interesting camera work there where we keep zooming in and out and these
Mm.
extreme close-ups that, yeah, I thought that in that way, in terms of some of its kind of craft level risks,
Mm-hmm.
it was a good thing to watch.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't just say, hey, why don't we just pop some popcorn, get on the couch and just
Put
like
on the
have a little
devil.
movie. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, towards the beginning with that, especially that opening scene, I was like, oh, this is going to be kind of like a surreal film. I looked at a lot of websites that describe this as a horror film. I don't know if I would just call it a horror. I mean, it's terrifying in a very specific way. It's not a movie that's meant to scare the viewer in any way. It's not that kind of a horror film. I think it's one of those kind of like one of my favorite films, Mulholland Drive by David Lynch, where it's not really like a horror film on the level of like we're trying to scare the viewer. It's kind of a horror film in terms of its dread and its intensity, and seeing this innocent person just go through this like this torture towards the end, and that horrific final scene with that character and Oliver Reed's performance. Just, I mean, that is an actor who did not that actor gave this movie his all, right?
Oh,
He
absolutely.
could have kind of, like he really commits to this character in this movie in a way that surprises me, and that he did not get along with Ken Russell, the director. Like, it does not feel that at all. Sometimes you can kind of see like, oh yeah, the actor is maybe like pulling back a bit, and that's not the case with Oliver Reed at all.
Yeah, I mean, any actor who's willing to shave their head, beard, and eyebrows is really, committing to the role.
Wasn't that a crazy shot when we first see him
Yeah,
bald? Like,
absolutely.
it does not look like the same person. Like, that's the same guy. Like, that's crazy. And his just like defeated nature when he walks in back into that courthouse, and he's bald and has no more of the facial hair, and he just looks so just like dejected and like, well, I don't think I'm getting out of this one.
Yeah.
Right. And what did we think of Vanessa Redgrave in this movie as Jean? What did you make of her performance?
Yeah, I thought her performance was exceptional. Even I thought there was a lot of kind of physical acting, not just
Mm-hmm.
her, tilting her head in order to appear as if she had scoliosis,
Mm-hmm.
but also she could do so much with her expressions. Like there were a lot of kind of still images that would zoom in on her, and she would just be looking up at the camera that were doing a lot of work. And
Mm-hmm.
so I thought she did an incredible job. And she has one of the best maniacal laughs I think that I've seen in a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah.
Where you kind of never know what's coming. And I could see a bit of a horror element in her character as more of an antagonist. Like
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when she starts like biting and spitting on uh, Grandier's
Yeah.
love interest, I
Oh,
mean,
right. Yeah.
her behavior is pretty unpredictable. But yeah, the performance itself was really great.
Yeah, Gemma, I think her name's Gemma Jones. She plays Madeline, and she's also still acting. Like she's been in multiple films and TV projects over the last 50 years. I kind of recognized her. I was like, I feel like I've seen her in more recent stuff, and so she's in a bunch of newer projects too. She was also really solid in this. What did Ken Russell bring to the movie as the director, do you think? Like in terms of like the way the film is shot, or like the way it's cut together, the pacing of it? Like what do you think the director brought to them?
Yeah, I was especially interested. I mean, I took some notes on some of these kind of surprising cuts between different, entirely different sets. Like there's one where it is cutting between, I think, a conversation between Grandier and Madeline, and then the folks who are trying to undermine him. And there are few parallels between the conversations. You know, the scenes themselves are not really speaking to each other. But I thought that was cool because it's creating tension. You know, there were some times where we would be cutting back and forth between these different scenes, and it wasn't as obvious of a connection as sometimes you see with that technique. And I was fascinated by the choices in terms of all of those extras, like the townspeople. So I don't know what part he had in orchestrating that, but they play such an important role in terms of just this collective, also a, strong example of maniacal laughter.
Yeah, especially at the end.
Yeah, a great kind of just broad character in and of themselves. So I thought there were just a lot of different elements that he was bringing together to really kind of disorient the viewer, which I thought was cool.
Yeah, at the same time, I admired that he didn't go too overly stylized because the material is already so controversial as it is. It's like, I think it would have been too much for him to really be like moving the camera crazy ways, using crazy colors. Like he does a little bit like that scene where it's like a weird dream scene where Jean, played by Redgrave, like sees Grandier as Jesus Christ, like on the cross, and then she like goes up and starts like kissing his body, and it's like the color there is like washed out. It's kind of an interesting little scene, but for the most part he doesn't really like overly stylize the movie with crazy cinematography, and he kind of lets the story play out. I liked that. I think this might have been too much if he had gone to like Tarantino or something with like the editing and the shots and things. He does do a little bit of that in the orgy scene that was cut from the movie that we got a chance to see in that one shot where it's like zooming in and out on that guy's face as he starts sweating.
Yeah.
I was like, is this an MTV music video? What's happening?
I did see that this director also did direct a music video.
Oh, he did?
Yeah. Like, I wonder if he's done some other, because it had that feel to me. Yeah.
Why do we think that scene was cut from the movie and thought destroyed for many decades until it was found later on? Why do we think that scene had to go in 1971 before people could see this movie?
I don't know. I mean, because it is shocking.
Yeah.
You know, it's blasphemous.
They're naked.
Yeah. Lots of nudity, lots of stuff going on, lots of things being defiled. So all of that is true. But I don't know if it is. I feel like it's just a lot more in your face than some of the other blasphemous or sacrilegious moments or images of icons being destroyed or defiled. Those are more subtle. I think there are more subtle critiques about religion and the relationship between church and state, which there's a great quote about early on in the movie. Whereas this one, it is in your face. And true. I think that the other parts of the movie, the other scenes that I think could be argued to be equally offensive or controversial, you have to do you got to pull out your English student card and kind of analyze it. Whereas that one, you can't argue with it. Yeah. You can't argue with the orgy scene.
Well, what's so wild about it is like, it's like these sexually repressed nuns and they're always in their costumes. And then once they think that, Grandier's like like evil spirit is like possessing them, then they take off their clothes and they're like running through the nunnery completely naked. And it's not just, they're not like afraid, they're like they're almost like free, like they're happy, you know. It's like a weird, it's a very like weird transition to that sequence of the movie.
Yeah, and then they also get kind of tricked, right? We
Yeah.
have Father Barry, I believe, who comes in and he's intended to do these exorcisms. When His Majesty arrives and says, "I have this ancient relic. It's some of Jesus Christ's blood, I think, and this is going to cure all of the nuns." And then it appears to do so, and then they open up the box and it is empty. And they're like, "You've tricked us," and he was like, "No, you've tricked us." So that's the kind of, I think, more subtle commentary about the ways in which, you know, public perceptions are shaped by religious belief. I feel like there's those more subtle kind of like ha jabs, but yeah, not dangerous.
And Jean at one point, she kind of gets this ball rolling, right? She's the one who first says like, "Oh, he's involved with witchcraft and things." And then later in the movie, she like almost like she's like tries to kill herself, right? Like she hangs herself, but she survives. And then she says the line, something like, I can't believe I've done this to an innocent man. Like, doesn't she say that out loud? Like she calls him innocent later in the movie. So
yeah, more than once. Yeah. And I think this is kind of a common trope in these witchcraft accusation stories, where at some point, largely women are responsible for other people's suffering, and then they're like, "Oh no, I feel bad," but not that bad.
Yeah. So yeah, she is kind of the villain of the movie, right? I mean, she doesn't really come to his defense, right? She could have done something more to stop what happens to Grandier by the end, right? I mean, she's just kind of chilling.
Yeah.
Well, it's got to happen.
Yeah, she seems pretty content by the end there.
Yeah. So what did we think of like the final half hour, like the trial scene? And when he's like on the stake and they light him on fire, like that whole section at the end, that was the part where I really could not take my eyes off the screen. Like that part of the movie is really powerful in a way that very, very few other films around this time do not have that kind of power. What did we think of that? Those final few scenes?
Yeah, I think part of the power was sourced from the fact that there's such an abrupt change in pacing. So we go from like plot point, romance, a billion characters, and then by that final, that final half hour, it's really slowed down, and I feel like it's a lot more focused in on Grandier's story. And he gets a lot of, he delivers some excellent lines, which I think the writing throughout this is remarkable. There was a lot of I don't know, a lot of philosophical moments where I was like, whoa, who am I? But
that's right. Yeah,
but I think slowing down the pacing in those final scenes really made me pay attention in a way that some of the more chaotic scenes where people are being possessed, or they think they're being possessed, it didn't grip me as much. I couldn't look away, except when I had to during torture.
Oh yeah. So yeah, there's a scene where he's just being tortured just by like this one guy in a room, and the look on Oliver Reed's face feels so real. Like that's a performance. Like he really does look like he's being tortured there. And what's so interesting is that the first hour plus of the movie, he's just such a commanding figure. It's like all is well. He's got this woman in his life who he adores, and he doesn't feel like a character that's going to go this much into hell. Like at the end, and so to see that side of him, he changes his look. They shave his head and all of his facial hair off, so he has a different look, and he's just like such an innocent towards the end, but he refuses, right? That one guy's like, "Tell us the truth." He's like, "No, I'm not going to do that, because I'm about to go to someone else who will recognize the truth." And what's happening.
They try to force that confession. And he truly does. He looks like a large baby. Like they've taken his hair and he's like in fetal position. And it's like, oh, poor buddy.
Yeah. When he's shaved, like he looked like Vincent D'Onofrio a little bit, the actor from Full Metal Jacket and Daredevil, that guy a little bit. And some of the makeup's a little, in the scene where he's actually getting burned, I was like, okay, how are they going to do this in 1971? And you can tell like there's a makeup effects artist waiting in the wings every few minutes to make
Yeah,
him
yeah,
look more and more charred. But you can get past it because his acting is so powerful, and what he's saying is really, it sticks with you. It's not just like
yeah.
him going, ah.
Yeah,
That could have
it's
been.
it's enough to suspend disbelief, I think. I mean, even though he's burning there for a long time, and I had to read about the actual figure's
Hmm.
execution, and it was similar. He was supposed to be strangled, and
Oh,
the
okay.
fire jumped up on the rope, and so he actually did burn.
Oh,
Like
so that was true. That
that.
happened.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
So even though he's just talking for kind of a long time, I was willing to ignore that fact.
Uh-huh.
Because I was like, wait, how long does this take? I don't know. It was making me ask some pretty macabre questions. But yeah, his acting is so compelling that
Hmm.
I was like, well, we'll just have to watch this to the
Yeah.
very end.
It did. This film, even more so than Redgrave, in a sense, it made me kind of want to seek out more of Oliver Reed's work, because really I'm just familiar with him in Gladiator. like,
Mhm.
like I'm like, oh, that's the guy who died during the production of Gladiator. But yeah, I need to look up his filmography, do a little bit more of a deep dive, and see kind of what other major films he's been in. So because he's so good, he's so
I
great.
think he's in Women in Love as well.
Okay, yeah, I think you're right. Glenda Jackson, who won Best Actress at the Oscars for her performance in Women in Love, she was the original choice for Ken Russell to play the Redgrave role in The Devils.
Oh,
And
interesting.
Glenda Jackson read the script and she said, "No, thanks."
Yeah.
I think she was like, I would like to go to Italy.
Yeah.
I don't want to be thrown in jail. But then Glenda Jackson is in Mary Queen of Scots with Vanessa Redgrave later the same year. And she's in a movie we just talked about on the podcast called Sunday Bloody Sunday with Peter Finch that came out same month, July of 71. So Glenda Jackson was also very much in demand at this time. So she couldn't do it all, AnnElise. She had to say no to something.
Yeah, I
She said,
guess so.
well, this
Not canonically.
character, this film, The Devils, I think I'll skip this one.
Yeah.
So yeah, anything else about the movie? God, that last scene with Redgrave is so creepy. She gets like his bone, like a bone of Grandier's, and I won't say what she does with it, but I'm like, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
still, like the whole movie, she is so sexually obsessed with this guy. And then even at the end, after his death, she's still like into him. And I'm like, what is happening?
Yeah.
What is
What
that
a big
about? I'm like, Ken Russell, I admire a lot of what you did with this film. I think you do take it a little bit too far at some point. It's like, come on, man.
yeah. He's like, okay.
I was
Let's
like,
take
oh,
it to the
maybe
very
there'll be
end.
like some sort of like character arc or reversal at the very end with like, what she kind of caused to happen to this guy. And like, no, she doesn't
Yeah.
change that much, right? I
No,
mean, she
no,
has
it's
her
a bit one
doubts
note.
a little bit, but it's such like a flashy kind of weird subversive performance from Redgrave that you kind of forgive it. It's like just, it's
Yeah.
a
She
character
makes
I've
it,
never seen in a movie, right?
yeah, she makes it more dynamic than it's written, I feel.
Yeah, I do think
So
she
it
gives
makes
it
it
more.
feel
Yeah,
like there's a lot more depth to her character, even though, yeah, I think it's a little bit one note.
yeah.
But
And then that very last shot where we see Madeline kind of look over and, you know, the man she loved has just died. And then she walks off down that pathway in that very wide shot that when you're looking at a film from 1971, that's there. Like that's not a CG effect or anything. And you see that vast landscape. I mean, sometimes they would paint in parts of a shot in movies of this era. So I don't think that happened for this last shot, but that's also a gorgeous kind of dreary shot. Does not leave you feeling good. She's kind of wandering. She gets to be free, right? So she's wandering off by herself, but you don't get the sense that she's going to be okay at the end.
yeah, she looks very alone. I mean,
Yeah.
she's flanked by these big poles that have skeletons mounted on them.
Yeah.
So it doesn't look like she's going towards some promised land.
Yeah. Like that skeleton we get at the very beginning of the movie, that close up of that skeleton with the worms in its mouth. That's where I went, oh, okay. It's going to have some horror elements. Like that's
Yeah.
definitely one of them. Really, a lot of really memorable shots in this that'll stick with me, especially that last shot. So before I ask my last question, AnnElise, anything else about the movie we haven't touched on that you want? Any other scenes or performances we didn't get to?
Um, Not that I can think of. I was one of the things that I was struck by though was the makeup on I can't recall the character's name, but she's like the first love interest, the one
Okay.
who has a baby by
Mm-hmm.
Grandier. But for reasons totally unknown, she has this like very, very white makeup, sometimes kind of green. And so I was like, does this indicate that she's like upper class? But I just kind of loved the styling on her because it was like,
Yeah.
I don't know why she looks like that.
Yeah. Do you think, like, does this film deserve to be considered one of the most controversial movies ever made? Do you think that's earned for this title?
I don't know. I think at this point, it's people are really hard. It's hard to shock people.
Yeah.
So I don't feel like this is any more offensive than
Okay.
some other films that have come out that are
Hmm.
especially like films that take a more earnest look at, I don't know, religion and the idea
Hmm.
of devils, things like The Conjuring, stuff like that. Like
Oh,
those
right.
seem like they would be just as controversial.
Yeah,
But
and they're not. People just like, I think those are more kind of genre films that people can just go to be scared. Whereas I
mhm,
think a movie like The Devils is dealing with some really kind of subversive themes, and kind of it's definitely a movie that makes you more uncomfortable than a lot of other films that we've seen from, between then and now. Yeah, but
yeah,
I actually did, in some, outside of that deleted scene, which was pretty shocking. Outside of that, I wasn't like, wow, I can't look at this. This is too much. I've seen a couple films where it's just like, it's almost like hard to watch. Where that's not the case here. It's such a beautiful film, in terms of its cinematography, and it's not like some of these kind of weird movies where you don't recognize anybody in the movie, and you're like, this almost feels like a documentary. Did some of this really happen? Did someone get injured? I always got the sense that I'm watching a theatrically released movie made by a very talented director, and that what we're seeing on screen, is him trying to tell the story the best way he knows how. I mean, I understand why it was so controversial at the time, for sure.
yeah.
Yeah. So if we were to remake this movie now, I asked this of each of my guests, AnnElise, if someone were to take this story and make it in 2021, how would it be similar? How would it be different, do you think? How has cinema changed over 50 years, where we would take this story? How could it be done nowadays? Could it be done now?
Yeah,
What do you think?
I mean, one element that would change a lot is I think some of the special effects, things that,
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of moments where, like in that torture scene, for example,
Mm-hmm.
um, the camera tends to cut away.
Yeah.
And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's because it probably doesn't look great
Yeah.
um, in terms of the special effects. So
Mm-hmm.
I think um, it, if it were to be made now, I could see it lying more clearly in the horror genre, being adapted more to that, or kind of moving more into the historical drama where it's kind of pared down and almost looks like a stage play.
Mm.
I feel like if it were made today, it would need to kind of align with the genre more clearly than
Right.
it did in this
Mm-hmm.
form.
Yeah, the genre of this movie is not super clear, and I think
Right.
if you were to make it today, we really need to know, like, who is this made for? If it's just like anybody, like, it's not going to
Yeah.
have that audience. So I think you would need to go a little bit more into horror, or you would have to have it be a little bit grounded, a little bit safer, and tell the story in a way that, I don't know, more people could watch it, right? Because if you were to
Mhm.
do it the
Yeah.
same kind of style, I don't there'd be enough people who would just refuse to watch it, and then it would just be like, well, what was the point of doing it again?
Yeah. Yeah. It
you
has to
know
earn its controversy, I think.
I don't think a remake of The Devils in 2021 would be released in theaters. That I do know.
No. Yeah.
Unless it just went full on like Conjuring scary, then maybe. And they just
Mhm.
took like some of the elements. But we've talked about this before. There's some movies I think they could maybe redo this in the 2020s at some point. The Devils, probably not so much. This might just stay in the past.
Yeah. Maybe I think it's happy there.
Yeah, exactly. But I would recommend, if you're interested in film history, if you're interested in works of the early 70s, this is a film you should seek out. I mean, it's hard to find. It was hard for us to find. It's not like just easily available on Amazon Prime or anything because of its controversy. I think it's a movie that's a little bit tricky, but if you can find it, it's pretty interesting. I'm glad I watched it. I probably will never watch it again. But I mean, even just Oliver Reed's performance in this movie, if you're interested in film history and film actors, like this is one you should definitely seek out. I would recommend it for serious film lovers. Like this is an interesting movie.
Yeah. And even for those who dabble when they're
And those who dabble.
from the MFA.
Yeah. If you're in an MFA program, a PhD program, you're looking for a title, like something that has like a theme that you're interested in, you're working with, and you're writing projects or whatever it may be. Yeah, there's a lot of it. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of really interesting essays and things written about this movie. I would love to dig into those too. All right, so that takes us to our last two segments, AnnElise. The first one's called the Divine Double Feature. This is where we pick a more modern film to pair with The Devils. So The Devil's Ends, what do you recommend someone might put on right after? Any thoughts?
This is a little different, but I'm thinking about it, and I would suggest Dogma.
Ooh, that's a good one. I was trying to think of like the last 25 years. What's like a religious themed film?
Yeah, because that one, we didn't really talk about it in our conversation today, but there was quite a bit of absurd humor in this movie.
And controversy.
Yeah. So I think that idea of kind of subverting some of these religious themes and putting them in a more modern context, I think that would be a good film to watch after.
That's an excellent choice. I saw that movie opening weekend. I have not seen it since. I don't remember much of it, but I've always admired the work of Kevin Smith, and it's one of those that I've been meaning to catch up with. I remember really liking it. It has an amazing cast, right? It's got like 10 plus really great actors in that movie, and I think it needs to be a comedy in some ways, right?
Yeah.
After this. Because like my serious response, the religious film that came to mind that I love, it would not be an easy double feature, but Doubt with Meryl Streep and Philip Seymour Hoffman is just an outstanding movie. It would be a long 4 hours.
Yeah.
I think to watch both of those. So maybe space them out, a week or something. Yeah. I always tell people, I feel like it was nominated for Best Picture. So people liked it. People loved it. But I don't feel like a lot of people talk about Doubt in 2021. And I did a Meryl Streep class a few years ago, and we watched Doubt, and it was probably one of the most interesting conversations I had about a movie with students. Like there was just a lot to talk about with Doubt. And I just think the four main performances in that are striking, and it's based on a play, but it never feels super slow or dull. Like it's always moving all the way to the end, and kind of has some similarities with The Devils. That's about kind of like sexual repression and intensity kind of inside, that religious institution, and made in 2008. So you can kind of see like, 35 years on or whatever it was, to kind of see how like cinema can deal with some of those similar themes. A little bit more of like a Hollywood film that more audience would be interested in seeing. So I thought Doubt. And then I thought, well, if you wanted to just go crazy, I'd say, I think after 2 hours of The Devils, you would have to watch a comedy. So the other way to go would be to just watch Bridesmaid.
Yeah.
A palate cleanser with, equally, like Vanessa Redgrave, so striking, so great in The Devils, a film about women that's just like really, really fantastic performances by so many great women in that movie. I like, every 3 to 4 years, I try to make an effort to watch Bridesmaids again because it is hilarious and I love it.
Oh, it's great. Yeah.
Doesn't really connect to The Devils very much outside of just, I think after the last 30 minutes of The Devils, we need to laugh a little. So, There you go. All right. So our final segment, Beyond the Flick, I thought we'd talk about Vanessa Redgrave a little bit. Her career in film goes all the way back to 1966, and she is still acting today. So outside of The Devils, AnnElise, have you seen her in any other films? Anything else come to mind of her long career? Vanessa Redgrave.
I've seen her in Girl Interrupted.
Girl Interrupted. Yes.
Favorite film of mine.
Great film.
Yeah, not a central role, but yeah, she did. I mean, she's one of those actors who I do feel that you just kind of feel confident when she's on screen.
Oh yeah,
that she's gonna do a good job.
Mm-hmm. She's great in that film. She would have killed it in the Winona Ryder role. She would have been great. maybe a little too old. But yeah, she's one of those actors. Yeah, you're right. She's one of those. Sometimes she's not the lead. often she's not the lead. She'll just pop up in a scene or two, like she does in Atonement as the older Saoirse Ronan in Atonement. But she's always the mark of a really quality project, right? She doesn't just show up and just a piece of crap. Vanessa Redgrave does really, really fine films, even some of her more obscure stuff. So I don't have any titles of hers from recent years. The three that I love that she's in are, first one's from the 70s called Murder on the Orient Express, which came out in 1974. Not the new one with Judi Dench and that big cast that came out in like 2017, I want to say. There was a version in 1974 with Ingrid Bergman and Sean Connery and Albert Finney. And she is in that film. If you have not seen the 70s version of Murder on the Orient Express, check it out. It's really great. Directed by Sidney Lumet. And then I love her. It's either her first or second film she was in 1966 called Blow Up. Have you heard of Blow Up? It's a very famous Italian film from the 60s. No. Michelangelo Antonioni, famous Italian director. It's about a fashion photographer who accidentally captures a death on film. So it's like a very stylized kind of foreign film with great actors in it, including Redgrave, but it's also got a mystery at the core of the movie. So it's not just like this kind of esoteric, crazy, you know, some of those films from like the 50s and 60s, the foreign films, have very little story. And sometimes that can turn me off when I'm an hour into a movie and nothing is happening. Blow Up is not that. Blow Up has a very compelling mystery story, but it's also got a lot of cool like mid-60s style and a director taking chances. And you get to see a very, very young Vanessa Redgrave in that. And then my favorite film she's in is the film she won an Academy Award for. She was nominated for 6 Oscars in her long career. And the movie she won for is from 1977. That's called Julia, starring Jane Fonda. Jane Fonda is the lead of the film. And that marked like one of her most successful films of the 70s. She was nominated. The movie got nominated. And Redgrave plays the title character, Julia. She's the friend of playwright Lillian Hellman, played by Fonda, who smuggles funds into Nazi Germany to aid the anti-Nazi movement. And this film is also notable for being the film debut of Meryl Streep. Meryl Streep's first movie is Julia. And like, this is the performance I think about when I think about Vanessa Redgrave, because she plays every emotion in this movie. She's not in the whole thing. She's not the star, but when she's on the screen, you can't look away. And it's just an astonishing performance, the one she actually won the Oscar for. So if you're interested in her work, I think you kind of have to see Julia from 77. So good on you, Vanessa. We love you. keep going, keep acting. Yeah. And we're both really interested in what you did in this film, The Devils, today, which I feel like not a whole lot of actresses at the time would have taken on a character like that and really committed the way that Redgrave did in The Devils. Right?
Yeah.
Really, really spectacular. All right, so that takes us to the end here, AnnElise. Do you have anything you'd like to promote or anywhere our listeners can find you online? Now would be the time.
Sure. I mean, you can follow me on Twitter at AnnElise Knows to see what I'm up to with writing there. That's it. Otherwise, I just sit around, read, watch movies.
And look for her short stories, even published at a few sites around.
Yeah,
do you have any that come to mind that our listeners can find your writing?
Yeah, I just had one come out, which is it's called Loss Prevention, and it's basically a choose your own adventure story, but
cool,
really deeply depressing. It's in Bowl Magazine.
Okay,
it's available for free online.
Oh, cool. We will check that out. All right, thanks so much for being here, AnnElise. This was a lot of fun to talk about The Devils with you today, and thanks to all of you for listening. You can find us online at filmat50.com or on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.